It's a beautiful bacon day, Cookie Crusaders. Today we're going to be talking about the truth about all toppings and a misconception I see in many conversations on the internet about Cookie Run Kingdom toppings. Now, when you look at toppings and you think about the top three, it comes down to attack, damage resistance, and cooldown. The reason being, there is no cap on attack power. You can bring out as much attack as you want from any cookie. Some are not designed for attack, some are designed more utilitarian, and that's okay. But just remember that the attack stat is one of the few ones that has zero cap that you can continuously keep pumping. The only other one that we know of is defense. However, there's argument that there is a soft cap on defense that gets raised a little bit each time they have adjustments to the game. We can't confirm that yet, as it takes quite a tremendous amount of testing to do so, but that is the prognosis on that currently. Now, HP, the reason this one is disregarded a lot is that damage resistance usually comes out as the clear winner. But in some instances, you can actually abuse HP in a much better situation. So, for instance, one of the cookies that I'm running HP toppings on, Financier. Reason being, if you see up at the top right corner of the stats here, I have over 500,000 HP on Financier cookie. In addition, we have 15% damage resistance. So, the 15 from the Monument that we get, the 15 from Financier, that's 30 already. If we're running Cream Unicorn, we get another 15. That's 45. And if we're running Wildberry, which is part of the meta teams right now, that's 60%. I'm only 20% away from the damage resistance cap, and I have a huge pool of health in comparison to if I had regular toppings that didn't focus on HP, 367,000. Now, here's why that matters. If you go to a cookie such as Caramel Arrow, who's yet again another popular meta cookie right now, and you look at the skills, Arrow rushes towards the enemy, dealing damage proportional to the enemy's max HP. This damage is capped at 300,000. So no matter how much attack power, no matter how much critical power this cookie can take on at once, you cannot deal more than 300,000 damage using the skill itself. The base attack, yes, definitely. The skill itself, it cannot exceed that. So what that matters is, as the game continues to progress, even though HP has been a very disregarded topping for a long time, that is one that's going to be progressing even further down the line, going to be making big impacts and big changes against how that is played. Keep going further. Let's talk about attack speed. We'll actually use Caramel Arrow again. So attack speed. This topping, yet again, another confusing one. Speeds up animations. It takes the overall time that a cookie is attacking and using their skill, less time if the attack speed is higher. Now, this can be bad in certain situations. Using it with cookies that teleport, like Black Pearl Cookie, or using it with a cookie who is in transformation, like Tiger Lily or Kumiho. It can mean that they have less time unless they have a guaranteed timer for their skill. So for instance, Black Pearl does not. Where if we look at Tiger Lily, we get the tiger for 5 seconds. So in this case, for Tiger Lily, it works because no matter what, you will be on top of the Butter Tiger for 5 seconds. The attack speed will not change that. You'll just be faster on top of the tiger. Where with Black Pearl Cookie, when she goes underneath, attacking the opponent, transporting to their side, if she is faster because of attack speed, she will come back to your side of the field sooner. Now, one could argue that means that you have a better chance of getting the skill off again. Great. But if you look at the stats, very low HP. And so for that reason, you're actually putting that cookie at more risk by having attack speed. So that is a consideration when you're building cookies with attack speed, if it's going to be beneficial to them or not. So cookies that I personally recommend with attack speed are either ones that are either going to be utilizing a very slow animation, Frost Queen, Eclair, Almond Cookie, Kumiho, things like that, or cookies that can benefit from fast auto attacks, Vampire, Pure Vanilla, Pomegranate, Cream Unicorn, Cotton Cookie. These cookies are going to be taking advantage of that extra speed of animation. They're going to be pumping up faster. It's going to be very helpful. Cookies that are not going to benefit from it, Sorbet Shark, no longer protected under the jump or the dive that happens. Black Raisin Cookie comes back quicker from the slashes in the dark air, more vulnerable. Latte Cookie, even though Latte doesn't necessarily have an animation that creates a need for no attack speed, the skill itself gives invulnerability during the skill. And so if you have attack speed increased, that inner vulnerability is removed sooner. So you're putting those cookies at risk for those reasons. Now, let's go ahead and talk about some more toppings. Next would be the cooldown toppings. Now, cooldown's interesting. Cooldown, in technical terms, is perfectly well used for every single cookie. And I say that with a grain of salt. Certain cookies just can't utilize it. So, we are going to talk about cookies that are not used as much right now, and that's some of the rare cookies. So if we think about Gumball Cookie, even though using that skill faster than the 13-second mark, making it go time and time again, having such low HP, low attack, low defense, that's going to mean that there's probably not enough protection for that cookie to activate in a proper and healthy way. Now, you're like, okay, yeah, that's a rare cookie. We get it. That makes sense. Why is that even useful at all? Well, let's talk about T-Knight. T-Knight's skill, 18 seconds. There's only so much you can cool it down. T-Knight has a tremendous amount of HP, attack, and defense. But because all of the skills are going to usually other cookies, your cooldown is really only benefiting those other cookies. And with the skill and the ideal that you're using with T-Knight, you want those other cookies to perish so that your T-Knight can be the best. Being also at that front position easily targeted the most in almost every scenario. And so for that reason, having a cooldown is not going to really benefit you because you're giving up damage resistance, you're giving up HP, you're giving up attack power, attack speed. All of those things can be very useful to T-Knight. If you look at the skill right here, the attack, the crit, the attack speed, all are raised by these specific measures. So those are three of the best substats that you can focus on when it comes to T-Knight. Now, if we go and talk about another topping, damage resistance. Yet again, one of the top three, one of the ones that are used the most often, but we are starting to come to a point where we're hitting that cap very easily. Back in the day, it was much more beneficial to have massively powered almond toppings that had perfect damage resistance, or near perfect, because at that point, you were getting that protection even if it was a lower HP cookie. So for instance, you can see here on my Caviar, because it's such a low HP and a decently low defense, we're running very, very high damage resistance. Now back in the day, like I was saying, that was really important because that wasn't really able to be achieved by too many options. And so for that reason, meta teams weren't able to run easily without running those as their defensive setups. Definitely a good setup without doubt, but it's changing. It's getting to a point where that's not necessarily the main build you need to do anymore. That's thanks to Wildberry. That's thanks to Cream Unicorn. That's thanks to Financier Cookie or Clotted Cream Cookie with the personal shields. Those cookies, they're providing their own forms of protection. Actually, even the Magic Candy on Purple EM now, they're creating their own forms of protection that either help them get to the cap or potentially exceed it if they're running too much damage resistance. So we are getting to that shift where it's not necessarily as needed quite as heavily as it was before. It is still a top 3, of course, but it's something to keep in mind and keep an eye that will change in time, as it does take new skills, new metrics, new mechanics to really bend and warp the overall playing field. Now, if we go to the next setup, and that's critical resistance. So, critical resistance, this is something that I think a lot of people still ignore. And that's because critical toppings themselves are still kind of ignored. But if we look at Oyster Cookie, and we look at Mala, we look at Sparkling, they raise critical chances. Oyster raises critical damage. We have treasures that can raise critical damage. We have monuments that raise critical damage. We have perks and monuments to raise critical percentages. These things are making it to where cookies are hitting critical hits more often. Now consider this. If a cookie has 50% damage resistance, it will block traditional damage at that level. But if it has 0 critical resistance, then a critical hit comes in, your damage resistance isn't doing anything because the hit is a guaranteed critical. It's a different metric. They wouldn't have it there if it didn't make a difference. If you just ran only criticals and damage resistance covered it all, they would even be able to take out defense. That wouldn't matter. That wouldn't make a difference. So critical resistance is one that I think people need to start focusing on more, especially if they're running almonds. If you're running almonds and you're trying to have damage resistance, attack, and cooldown as your main setups, you're probably going to be falling behind in arena battles. Because instead you should be running damage resistance, critical resistance, and then one of those other 2 substats. Either focus more on attack or more on cooldown for your skills to go off. One or the other. I can tell you that most of the time, cooldown's the better one to go for, so that you have your skills activate while you're protected under those almond barriers. So consider that as well. Now, if we go and talk about I would say 2 black sheep of the crew. These are going to be the ones that aren't really focused on, but they still work. And the reason they work is because you have to use them on cookies you don't think they would normally work on. So for instance, I did a video a while ago where I made amplified buff on dark cacao work almost as good as almonds and critical toppings. That's because I focused on a high damage resistance to make sure that there was survivability. I gave high amplified buff to make sure that all the healers were extra strong in healing dark cacao. And I made sure that there was critical resistance to make sure we didn't hit any unsuspecting hits either. With that setup, the high HP, the high defense, and the already strong, powerful attack from dark cacao, and all the debuffs the dark cacao gives, it was a beautiful combination. And so that was a cookie that could utilize Amplify Buff in a really big way. Where Candy Diver, where a lot of people have been disappointed, Candy Diver specifically uses Amplify Buff in a very good way, but not as the main focus, but rather as a good substat focus. And so that is because the skill itself is buffed by Amplify Buff, but the skill activating more times because of cooldown and having more auto attack healing from attack speed is more beneficial than just straight Amplify Buff focus. And so it comes down to, you can't have one topping be the answer to everything. Rather, you have to take the specific weaknesses and push them upward with other toppings, or take the strengths and double, if not triple them, with that same mentality. Debuff resistance, this one's a tough one. I'm actually a little bit disappointed in this one. The reason why is that debuff resistance does have a cap. That was introduced when Parfait was introduced, and I really think that they need to remove that cap. Here's the reason why. If you go into the toppings and you look at debuff resistance, so you look at kiwi toppings, They on their own are 3% for maxed out, and you can get another 2% for the substats. So 5% per, plus if you have 5 equipped, another 5%. So that is 30% debuff resistance from just a full set of toppings that are perfect with debuff resist. Then if you look at the skill from Parfait, you get 40% debuff resist. So if you have those two situations together, you're going to be hitting the cap, because the cap, I believe, is 75% right now. That only gives you 3/4 of the way figured out. And the issue is, there is so many skills right now that cause debuffs, whether it be freeze, whether it be stuns, whether it be lockdowns, or bleeding, or burns, anything like that. All those are debuffs. Now, yes, you can purify them with herb, you can purify them with monocle, and there's a few that cannot be purified, so that does make a difference. But if we were to get to 100% debuff resistance, at that point, you can just ignore every debuff in the arena. And I think that would be a truly fun and impactful way to experience battles, because then you could build Kiwis with some good damage resistance, maybe some good cooldown, and focus on debuff resistance as the main focus. And then you just have protected cookies that can't be debuffed, that can't be pushed downward. And so that's a really interesting thought. Now, there is a cap, it's hard to hit, and it's something I'm going to be experimenting with soon. So I'm going to be spending some of my topping pieces to build out a team that is very focused on debuff resistance, to try and have as least amount of debuffs on the team as possible. It's going to be pretty tough, because I have to think about which 5 cookies will benefit from it the best, and will be able to utilize it the best. So we're going to put that together too. But I wanted to kind of give a higher level on all these toppings and what they really, really can be capable of. We can dive in further if you guys want. Just let me know in the comments and tell me which ones you want to know more about. Obviously, some of them are pretty self-explanatory, but it is important to understand that we're really barely scratching the surface with most of these toppings, and if they ever, and I mean ever, introduce large or extra large toppings that we get more percentages of each of these metrics, things are going to get pretty crazy, because damage resistance, debuff resistance, and cooldown are the only specific ones that have caps. Cooldown, yes, you can technically keep cooling down forever on every cookie, but as you know from Gingerbrave, you can only go so far down. So some of them you can't even get too far down with, and that can make a big difference. But if they do introduce a way to upgrade these stats even further, it's going to really matter understanding the full breakdowns of all of these and how you can abuse them with specific cookies. So I hope this video has been helpful for you guys today. I appreciate you guys watching, and all of your feedback is super important. Have a wonderful night. Thank you.